The landscape of Irish media, and RTE, the state broadcaster in particular, is defined by its champions. These figures, propped up by the overall media apparatus and extensive state funding, become akin to legends. Jerry Ryan, Gay Byrne, Marion Finucane, Claire Byrne, Marty Morrissey, all iconic and important in their own right. But what happens when a legend bleeds? What happens when one of these titans of public broadcasting becomes the subject of intense scrutiny? What happens when a whole country turns on its media darling? What happened to Ryan Tubridy? Ryan Tubridy was born in 1973 in Dublin. His father, a successful doctor, and his grandfather, a former TD who fought in the old IRA, he came from a pretty well-to-do family. His connection to the state broadcaster started when he was quite young, when at the age of 12 he wrote a letter to RTE complaining that there weren't any programmes that were for people his age. In response, he was invited to do film reviews on the Saturday morning programme Anything Goes. Upon officially starting at RTE after college, he was immediately taken as the protege of the legendary Jerry Ryan. And from there, his career moved rapidly, working with presenter Pat Kenny and soon getting his own show on 2FM in the mornings, The Full Irish. Morning radio became critical to his brand, and he was good at it. His style wasn't necessarily something especially innovative, but proved to be incredibly engaging to the public. At its peak, The Ryan Tubridy Show was the second most popular radio programme in RTE's entire catalogue, eclipsed only by the news programme Morning Ireland. Radio was not the extent of Tubridy's reach, however. There is one jewel in the RTE crown that is coveted above all else. A role held by one man for over 40 years. The host of The Late Late Show, one of the longest running talk shows on the planet. The first host, Gay Byrne, was perhaps the most legendary journalist in Irish history, and he was present for some of the most iconic moments in Irish television.
I ain't saying no more about this except to say just one thing, and this is all I'll say.
He retired in 1999 and was succeeded by the aforementioned Pat Kenny, whose career up to that point was primarily in political journalism rather than typical talk show stuff. He left in 2009 for his own show. His relatively brief run on the show was somewhat unremarkable, but we did get perhaps the single best clip in Late Late Show history.
The name of the girl in Bavaria. You seem to have a morbid fascination for necrophilia.
I do, I like women.
For necrophilia.
If you don't mind, I like women.
Well worth watching the whole clip, but I digress. Anyway, after Kenny's departure from the role, Tubridy was the obvious successor. As host, his reputation was somewhat mixed. He generally did better when the topic was that bit less serious, and when it came to more profound topics, Tubridy generally either went too soft on the guest or just lacked grace completely. Carol Kinsella put it best when he said, "Tubridy was stronger when his interviewing forces far less powerful than he." And while he gives his own set of examples, I'm going to use this clip of an interview with Jerry Adams.
About your grandfather, because you're obviously proud of your grandfather.
But
he was a member of the IRA. He opposed the treaty.
In a very, Jerry, come on, in a very different time. I'd say if you looked into the audience and you could do a hands up and find at least a third of them had relatives who were in the old IRA. So I don't think the comparison is remotely
why not,
is
Ryan?
fair.
Why not?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into a political state. No, because
while he was out of his depth when it came to politics, where he excelled and where he truly earned something approximating a legendary status is with the annual Late Late Toy Show. The last Friday of every November heralds what is often the most viewed television event of the year, wherein children take over the show completely. It was effectively a high-production toy ad, but it is the highlight for children every year. Tubridy made a conscious effort to shift away from the toys themselves towards a more human element, with more celebrity cameos and heartfelt moments. Well, this worked a treat and became the cornerstone of his public reputation. I myself have a personal connection to the toy show. Back in 2014, I was one of those kids.
Hit me, baby, one more time.
I will never be as cool again. Anyway, all this to say that while Ryan Tubridy had his flaws and shortcomings, and wasn't always very popular, he had an undeniable impact on pop culture. And his long career and the span of The Late Late Show from 2009 to 2023 was filled with some truly famous moments. But here's my question to you. How much is that impact worth to you? Monetarily, I mean. How much from public funds should go towards paying Mr. Tubridy? RTE seemed to think that he was worth more than any other person in the organisation, with his salary in 2019 being €495,000. To put that into context, that is nearly twice the salary of the Taoiseach, the literal leader of the country. In 2020, however, RTE vowed to reduce the salaries, with Tubridy's own salary taking an 11% hit. When it came to contract renewal, however, the deal needed to be sweetened. It turns out that in addition to the massive salary, Tubridy was to be paid an additional €75,000 per year. The mechanics of these payments were a little strange, with the money coming out of the car company Renault, with the only requirement being that Tubridy would need to make a handful of personal appearances per year. RTE already had an existing commercial agreement with Renault, which would become substantially cheaper because of this deal. Rather than recording this expense as, well, an expense, RTE instead elected to reduce their recorded income, effectively hiding the payment. In 2021, however, Renault did not renew this deal, and thus the additional $75,000 came directly from the RTE coffers. Interestingly enough, Tubridy wasn't the only figure to get embroiled with this Renault deal. Sports presenter Marty Morrissey was given a free car for hosting a handful of Renault events. And as the scandal broke in 2023, Morrissey actually returned the car, calling it an error in judgment. There were also unconfirmed reports of him taking a train from Colbert Station in Limerick for a GAA semi-final, but that's more of an aside, and I have no concrete proof. All of this was uncovered by an internal audit of RTE's finances, and a further investigation by Grant Thornton made these more public. As you might imagine, the media had a field day with the story, but what might surprise you is where the majority of the media coverage was coming from, that being RTE itself. The story was the focus of the 6-1 News near daily for several weeks, despite it reflecting very poorly on the organisation. One can only speculate as to why this was. This all culminated in the Oireachtas hearing on the 11th of July 2023. His defence was pretty simple, that it was RTE's fault. He claimed that he was never consulted with regard to the RTE statement about the scandal that mentioned him on 15 separate occasions, and that RTE had both underreported and overreported Tubridy's income at different points, with full knowledge that this was incorrect. He also claimed that he had asked about this underreporting, but had never got anything back. One of the most interesting points in this defence was...
Anybody. Why? Because the only figure in this whole story whose face was recognisable was Ryan Tubridy. He's been made a poster boy for this scandal, and that's undeserved. This is not the Ryan Tubridy scandal. This is the RTE scandal.
This is the sentiment that he holds to this day. It was also maintained that there was horrendous reporting from RTE with regard to the story. And there certainly is an argument to be made that it was in the interest of RTE to use someone as a scapegoat. And who better to use than the person who was far and away the most expensive person to keep around? Despite this, however, Tubridy faced intense scrutiny at the hearing, mostly around the apparent negligence when it came to being overpaid and the Renault deal. Outside of the financial scrutiny, he was also interrogated about his decision to step back from hosting The Late Late Show a couple of months before the story broke. Tubridy maintains that the decision was deeply personal and was entirely unrelated to the brewing scandal. The full hearing was well over 2 hours long, but ultimately there was only a single soundbite that really mattered, and this one served as the final nail in his coffin.
And yes, this salary is enormous. I understand that. But that doesn't affect my soul. It can't.
Okay, we are going to conclude on that, Senator.
This literally could not have been received worse. It's helpful to have an understanding as to how RTE is funded. Despite running advertisements, the broadcaster receives a substantial amount of funding from the state, just under 60% of the total revenue. About 190 million a year of this funding comes from the TV licence fee, a payment of €160 per year that goes directly to RTE and needs only be paid if there's a TV in the household. It has become a deeply unpopular tax in recent years. The financial dealings in question also happened during the pandemic, a time at which there was a huge increase in poverty and the state coffers were pushed to their absolute limit. At a time when people were struggling for literal survival, a deal was being made for one of the highest paid media personalities in Irish history to get paid an additional 75 grand. At the time, the Director General of RTE was a woman by the name of Dee Forbes. Even before this point, Forbes was no stranger to controversy. In November of 2020, a party was hosted for a high-profile retirement at RTE, attended by some of the most prominent faces with the broadcaster. This was during the height of the pandemic restrictions, and no social distancing was observed at all. As scandals go, this was pretty common at the time. The famous Partygate at Westminster is the most prominent example, but even in the Irish context, a large party for the Oireachtas Golf Society was held in August of 2020, which also observed no adherence to COVID guidelines. That's a full scandal in and of itself, so I won't go into too much detail here. But either way, Forbes survived the party scandal more or less unscathed. The day before the Grant Thornton findings were made public, Forbes tendered her resignation from RTE. The timing of this, of course, cannot be ignored. To this day, Forbes has never gone in front of the Oireachtas, citing health concerns. But regardless, she is unlikely to ever face any legal consequences. So, what happened to poor old Ryan? Well, he officially left RTE under public pressure in August of 2023. He pretty quickly landed on his feet, moving to London to host a show for Virgin Radio, a role which he left in December of 2025. Currently, he's hosting a podcast, The Bookshelf with Ryan Tubridy. I think it's fair to say that the level of public influence that Tubridy has is nowhere near its peak, and in my own opinion, I don't think it ever will be again. One might make the argument to say that he fell for the sins of others. Others might say he fell for his own avarice. Who's to say? All I know is that he hasn't given up and still regularly makes appearances in the media, trying to salvage his once stellar reputation. Before I finish up, there is one side tangent to this whole saga that I think is worth covering. That is, Toy Show the Musical. This was a frankly baffling idea to translate the annual TV special into a full musical theatre production. Inexplicably, the show cost an alarming €3.5 million to produce. And before the script was even written, and in the middle of the pandemic in 2022, tickets went on sale. The aim was to sell roughly 90,000 tickets. A mere 11,044 tickets were sold in total, incurring a loss of €2.2 million. These scandals broke roughly at the same time, and while Ryan Tubridy had literally nothing to do with the musical itself, his name being synonymous with the toy show left that his name was tied to the failure in the minds of the public. This certainly didn't help his case in the court of public opinion. This scandal is one of the most pointed examples of Irish state corruption in the last 10 years. For 5 years, the organisation that we trusted to be impartial in all facets of life was deeply corrupt behind closed doors. It got to the point that people began to question the need for an organisation like RTE, which is so expensive and, in the eyes of many, can't be trusted. Is it time to change the way media works in Ireland? Or has the rot been removed with the exit of D. Forbes? I can't say, but RTE has a lot of work to do to re-earn the public's trust. Well, that's all from me. Go raibh míle and good luck.